If I could throw anything into a fire, I would throw the thoughts and memories shared between me and my late grandfather. Remembrance is endless and eternal and can be brought back in an instant. I would throw into a fire my memory of my great-grandfather, the greatest, strongest, most courageous man I had ever known, my greatest superhero. It is my undying endeavor to always remember, when I was a kid, he was my best friend. Every first and third Saturday of the months of November and February, my grandfather would take me to the movies. I'd wake up for breakfast, his famous waffle recipe that his brother gave to him during the war, a glass of chocolate milk that my grandma hid in the highest racks of the fridge so my curious fingers wouldn't spoil my appetite. I'd kiss my mom on the cheek as she dressed me in orange, second-hand hand-me-down sweater, along with a hand-knitted beanie she gave me for my birthday. Meanwhile, Grandpa would start his truck. The rev of his engine shook the room of the house, like turbulence in the international flight. I would have never known if it were an earthquake, or a large semi going to an unknown location. I'd get into the truck, just me and him, and we'd drive to 7-Eleven for snacks and his favorite gas station coffee. He visited the store so often that the clerks and managers knew him by name. When we traveled to the cinema, he would let me move the clutch of his truck for him as he drove. It made me feel so confident and so independent that I, of 8 years of age, was almost driving. Going to the popcorn cart was his favorite. He'd always get the biggest bucket of popcorn. In preparation, he'd put a pinch of salt, jalapenos from the nachos, and he'd drizzle butter in the barrel of butter. Grandpa loved romantic comedies. I remember he would talk to me about the new movies he was interested in seeing. He would ramble on, but my young ears were too young to understand. We always started the day with a matinee. I remember watching 3D movies when they first came out. Back then, the 3D glasses had a blue lens and a red lens. I remember after every 3D movie, it always made me dizzy. He always had a deck of cards in his pocket, and if I asked him, he would show me his favorite magic tricks. In between the movies, he would let me pick a card and make it reappear from behind my ears. After our movie, Grandpa would talk to many people who knew him. He was always a local celebrity. He coached Little League Baseball in the spring in our community for 30 years. More often than sometimes, he would run into 30-year-old kids he used to coach, but now coaches their kids. When I'd sit next to him, I always sat to his left. He never let me sit on his right. He said that seat was reserved for Grandma, but I can't recall a single time Grandma came and joined us to the theater. As I sat to his left, he always carried a bucket of popcorn beneath his left arm. He never parted from his bucket of popcorn. I would often bug him for his sacred popcorn, and he would budge and offer me a handful to keep me quiet during the film. He always gave me few quarters to play a few games during the trip. My favorite was the racing games. We would race for hours, not even aware of how much time we were wasting. I remember getting home late from the cinema, and I'd play Nintendo at night, 'cause at my grandma and grandpa's, I rarely had a bedtime. I never saw him depart from his bucket of popcorn until late into the evening. It would take my grandma to tap her foot and say, "Rudy, you left the theater a while ago. Time to put the popcorn away, honey." My grandma was the only one who could get him to listen. They were deeply in love with each other. I remember those days most. So simple, so eventful, everything full, a glimpse of bliss. They would often put old records, jazz records, in the living room near the fireplace and slow dance to jazz ballads. It could easily switch to old rock records from the 60s, and they would dance all morning. and through the afternoons. I remember playing in their bedroom once and I saw a tin of cookies in her closet. I remember thinking, "Oh boy, Grandma and Grandpa have a secret stash of treats." Upon opening it, I found hundreds of letters between my grandparents when Grandpa was overseas. I even saw explicit photos of a young woman in a bikini in front of my grandpa's truck. Their relationship was strange to me, even till this day. After finding those letters, I asked her what it was. Grandma said, "Those are the love letters we kept. When your grandpa Rudy came home from the war, he proposed to me and we got married." I remember how happy they were. I remember how unaware I was. They were around for a long time. They shared countless moments with each other, and we watched and tried to learn about our own feelings, and whom we'd get to share the pleasure of the far, far future with. I would never forget the last time we went to the movies. I had this ache in my stomach that lingered all morning, and it wasn't just because I got into my grandma's chocolate milk. The morning Grandpa was wearing a plaid, red and black shirt, with jeans and work boots. He always smelt of black licorice and coffee. I was playing trains in the living room next to the fireplace. One by one I would connect the blocks to allow passengers to get to where they're headed, and I always had a specific character that I was every time. My grandpa came in to play trains with me. We played almost every morning together. But I remember he began trembling and slurring his words. I was confused, like maybe he was doing it on purpose. He got up from the floor and walked to my grandmother's room. Then they left together without saying a word. Late in the next day, they came back and it seemed as though the entire family was there. My aunts and uncles and cousins. The entire house became a fiesta, with foods and gifts. When my grandpa walked in that afternoon, everyone was clapping, congratulating him. It was great to see him. I missed him. I thought he had gone out fishing or something. The one thing I noticed since that day, he would never be the same. He began degrading in his health. He became much more forgetful. He would forget how to do yard work. The fish tank in his living room that he loved so much was never cleaned. He stopped writing poetry. He even forgot my name. He even mistook me for my father a time or two. Over time, I became to know him as an angry, old, forgetful man. I remember being mad at him for never wanting to play with me anymore. I don't know why I felt like that. I was so angry. I knew so little. I didn't understand. Sometimes I felt like yelling at him, my best friend, to be more engaging with me, but I never had the heart to do it. When I was about 10 years old, he started calling me Raymond. Raymond is my dad's name. He would call me Raymond for sometimes weeks at a time. I remember being scared. Why would he call me by my father's name? Did he forget? Why was my family so worried about his health? Why did we stop going to the movies? Grandpa died on April of 2009. It was a day that stuck with me. I felt this huge loss of power. I was so young. I didn't even understand what was going on. Next year will be 11 years since he died. I still haven't realized how to cope with the loss. There are times I visit Grandma and she seems so lost. She always says, "It is my kids that keep me going, and it is the memories of Rudy that make me know that he must be watching me from somewhere." I remember a week after he died, the stray cat that we started calling Oreo began appearing on our porch. My grandma fell in love with that kitty. She always held it, and it always followed her to all the rooms of the house. This little black and white cat, could it have been him somehow? Could that cat have been a messenger sent from the heavens to keep my grandma happy? Why did he call me Raymond? And why did he stop talking? I remember this one time before he died, he took me and my cousins fishing. We didn't know how bad he was. No one told us. My cousins and I went fishing in the ocean. It was the first time we went on a boat. He said, "When I was out of high school, I joined the military. I used to travel all over on ships to different places. I remember he coughed a lot, but never failed to make us laugh. That day we caught a ton of fish, and he said, "This is the best fishing I have done in years." That must have meant a lot to him, because he went fishing often, usually every few days. My cousins were very happy. When we got home, the entire family, some of them from across the country, were all in town. With the fish we caught, my dad and Grandpa made fish tacos. My father said, "Remember when we used to go fishing when I was a kid?" And my grandpa replied, "What do you mean?" There was a long pause before Grandpa said, "We just went fishing this morning, don't you remember?" And they both began to laugh. He never stopped dancing with Grandma, though. Every night she would put on music. One time she put on this old jazz song on a record. She said almost chokingly, "Do you remember when we danced this song when we were kids? You played the radio in your truck, came around and opened the door for me, and you picked me up and spun me around. It was then that I knew I would spend the rest of my life with you." And he said, "Of course I remember. How can I forget? You are, and always have been, so beautiful." And Grandpa would write poetry in his free time. When he was working on the house and wasn't paying attention to me, I would read his poems. And here's one. "My heart has been filled, locked with a key. If you were not mine, then where would I be? You were all I would need. You were all that I knew. You gave me your life. Thank you for being you." I miss him more now that I could look back at all the joy he brought us. I remember this morning from writing this, how much I wish I could tell him how much of a role model he was and has been for me and my papa. How much I would do to just have one more day with him. I'll never forget him. You're always in my heart. You gave me the strength and courage to become a young man. Thank you. For being my best friend. For caring for me when my parents couldn't. For picking me up from school. For reading to me before bed every night. For taking me to Disneyland and fishing and the movies. Thank you for being you.